Okay, well, folks, welcome to the Transforming Assessment webinar series. We're looking today at designing learning engagement with computer-based summative examinations. Our speakers today are Richard Walker and Zoe Handley from the University of York in the UK. So, Richard, would you like to begin, please? Remember to press your talk button.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning. Can I just do a quick sound check just to check that you can hear me? So can you, let's clear the ticks here, and can you select a yes tick if you can hear me? That's lovely. Thank you very much. Great. Okay. Well, good morning from York, and good evening to everyone in Australia and New Zealand, and welcome to the webinar. I'm joined, as Matthew said, by my colleague Zoe Handley from the Department of Education, and we're going to present on a joint research project between the Department of Education and the Central E-Learning team at the University of York, investigating design issues for computer-based testing and the factor influencing student acceptance of this assessment method. What we've done, we've designed in the discussion spaces in the talk, so we do want to hear from you, and we will be using the chat box, but do feel free during the talk to type in questions, and one of us who isn't presenting will try and track your questions and respond to them live during the session. Okay, so to start with, a few introductory comments about us and our research. The research that we're going to present on today was based in the Graduate School and the Department of Education at the university. York, for those that have not visited us, is roughly 200 miles north of London, 2 hours by train, and we're a university of 16,000 students. So for the UK, that's sort of medium-sized. For Australia, it's a small university. The graduate school within the education department is roughly around 300 students, 2/3 of whom study for a master's degree, and you can see the range of programs that we offer. The top and bottom programs in that list are the language programs, and it's those that we're interested in today. We worked with around about 150, mainly Chinese international students in our study on a research methods module, which the program supplies students for. So why do we get interested in computer-based testing? Well, it's partly by necessity in that we had an increasing language education cohort of sort of 150 students plus, and we were obliged to start assessing research methods which previously had been a core module but one that hadn't been assessed. So therefore we had to find a way of finding a sustainable assessment schema for the module, and do that during what is a very busy teaching term in our spring term, which is directly after Christmas. So we're looking for a solution, but we also saw a number of opportunities in moving to digital marking. First of all, to get a more consistent approach through the automation of marking for MCQ questions. The other thing that attracted us was the item analysis tools. By going digital, have a facility to review question items and to sort of weed out weak questions, underperforming ones, and calibrate the exam to the level of difficulty that we were looking for. And I guess another advantage was being embedded, working very closely with central services right from the start and getting their full support, because what we were doing is sort of pioneering a new summative assessment approach for the university as a whole, which the university can learn from. So we had the support of the desktop and IT services team, as well as my own e-learning team with the department. So, but we went without challenges, and obviously starting to design any sort of exam from scratch is challenging, and particularly one when you are moving from what was a sort of a paper-based pen and paper culture to a digital one. The other side is how you really address authentically criticality and higher order thinking, which are the sort of levels that are demanded of a master's standard, and how you do that through the use of MCQ questions. And then there were the more practical challenges that we faced, largely the size of the cohort, which I've mentioned, and lack of policies, protocols for this type of assessment, and a physical estate to support it. So I think reasonably common, York, in that across the UK sector, in that we don't have a dedicated assessment centre, and particularly a large one to test students. So we were looking at how we could make use of existing PC classrooms. Just a few concluding sort of introductory comments, and that's to say that the purpose of the talk, the focus is really on 2013-14 and 14-15 academic years and the cohorts we work with there, principally through the use of our own learning management system, or VLE as we call it, Blackboard Learn. But we've been looking into this, into computer-based testing from a much earlier period, and we started in 2009 with trials with question mark perception, and then worked through other sort of technology solutions, benchmark what we were doing with the sector, and I'll say a bit more about that shortly, before we arrived at a stable solution that we were confident in, starting with low stakes or indeed formative testing, and then moving on to higher stakes testing. So it has been an iterative process, and one where we've faced a number of setbacks before arriving at a system and a service that we had great confidence in. So that was the introduction, quite lengthy, apologise for that, but this is the agenda and our roadmap for the talk today. It's in 5 parts, so we'll say something briefly about what we understand about the UK HE context for computer-based testing and what the research literature tells us. And then we'll briefly touch on the technology that we used before going on to discuss findings and the transferability of our findings to our institutional assessment context. And there we definitely are looking forward to a lively discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to move on and start with a question: what do we know about computer-based testing? Well, from a UK perspective, and I do apologise, sort of quite blinkered probably in speaking from this sector alone, so it'd be interesting to get perspectives from other HE sectors. But certainly in the UK, there has been sort of long-standing practical guidance available to us, largely through the JISC, the Joint Information Systems Committee, which is government-funded. We published an influential report in 2007, which you can see the screenshot of. And in that publication, it highlighted the implementation of low to medium stakes assessment across UK HE sector, namely institutions like Loughborough University, which were busy undertaking over 80,000 e-assessment per year across a range of disciplines. And through our own personal benchmarking as well, we want to learn from other universities, and there are plenty that have been doing this at a high stakes level for a long time. So I noticed Bill Warburton from University of Southampton has joined this talk, and we went down to meet him and see what Southampton were doing. Also Dundee and Bradford. University of Bradford, particularly interesting in that they ran a Pathfinder project, which was part of a GIST program in 2007-8, looking at computer-based testing, and it was a sort of a beacon to sector, focusing on the use of thin client systems and smart card technology, and that certainly interested us. More of that later on. The other sort of influential report in the UK sector is the report on e-assessment quality, and the REAP report, and what that stresses is the importance of getting institutional policy right to produce high quality e-assessment. So I think, taking account of the publications, the benchmarking and that report, we had a sort of a useful set of resources to draw on when I'm thinking about setting up our own service. However, I think the general picture is that the pace of adoption of high-stakes assessment is still quite slow, and makes up a small proportion of the total assessment that's going on. But as you can see in the table here, which is taken from ESI's survey data, and that's the national survey that we run every 2 years on technology-enhanced learning, we can see that it is increasing in real terms. And by 2014, you can see 71% of responding higher education institutions declare that they were using summative assessment tools, and we have 9 institutions, possibly some of which are the ones I mentioned earlier, have implemented defined response testing for high stakes for over 50% of their courses. I imagine these figures now are quite dated. We're in the throes of the 2016 survey, and I imagine those figures are far greater now. So, small portion as a whole of computer-based testing, but a rapidly increasing sort of picture. But the question is, to what extent is this activity in engaging students with stakes testing actually evidenced through hard search evidence? So, to investigate that further, we looked at the literature, and what we saw was that the research to date had not focused really on the student perspective, but had focused more on the impact of computer-based testing versus pen and paper and traditional formats. And although there have been a number of studies there, the actual sort of output of that had not shown any sort of major differences between the two mediums. What the studies have focused on is they've drilled into particular sort of individual differences which may affect the impact of high stakes testing, focusing on variables such as gender, race, and digital literacy, as well as socioeconomic status, and also themes such as computer anxiety and performance. But again, the effects of learner variables tend to be small, rather insignificant. So, in terms of what the literature is telling us, not a great deal in terms of the merits of computer-based testing. We found that one of the sort of limitations in the research has been that it's been largely sort of case study research, looking at sort of one-off interventions. And although there have been focus groups and the like, what we're not seeing is post-examination surveys and follow-up research to look at the sustainable and long-term effects of computer-based testing. So, just to sort of recap, really, in terms of the literature, we have only come across a sort of a limited number of studies on student attitudes, some of which are noted there. Those studies that have been conducted have flagged some interesting variables, such as computer anxiety, student perceptions of self-efficacy and use of computers, and general concerns by students over the security of the medium. And we felt those were interesting and deserved follow-up research. But, I mean, one of the big frustrations for us, given our context, was that a lot of this research was being directed to the undergraduate experience, and, as I mentioned, also lacking longitudinal pictures so that we could see how computer-based testing affected students over a longer period of time as they became accustomed to it. But the final point, and I think the key one, which I'd like to debate, is the absence of literature on the postgraduate taught experience, which is central to what we wanted to do. And we feel this is a key stakeholder group that has been omitted in the research. So what I'm going to do now is just move to a discussion point, and in fact sort of ask, do a poll now actually to ask whether, relating to the first question that you can see on the slide, you agree that international postgraduate students, and let's sort of focus on the international side of that as well, require specific support strategies to engage with high-stakes computer-based testing. So could you, from the drop-down menu, the tick box there, could you vote and you either agree or disagree with the proposition there that postgraduates do require specific support strategies? Okay, some people are still mulling this one over, but we've got quite a few ticks actually, so there's general agreement. That's good. Could I then ask you in the chat box to, don't have to type a lot, but maybe just put down some of the challenges or issues that you feel are important that distinguish this group from undergraduates? Okay, so people are busy typing away. While you're doing that, I will just sort of speak a little bit about the York context and say that I concur with the ticks there, and obviously that's the premise of the talk here, that we do feel that postgraduates do have specific needs, and from a York perspective, we have faced some particular challenges. I mean, the first is that in terms of the timing of our computer-based exam, we have very little lead time with our students before they go into their first exam in the first term, and they do a formative exam a few weeks in, and then they get the real exam at the beginning of the second term. So there's very little lead time to prepare them. They're not enculturated with the way we do things. The other issue, which we're not going to have time to talk about today, but is a really important one, is the issue over declaring special arrangements. And at the start of the year, obviously, students are briefed that they will face a computer-based exam, but many students, if they don't have the need for special arrangements for traditional study tasks, tend not to make declarations. And there may be issues related to motor impairment or specific issues related to taking the exam online, which they don't declare. So there can be a culture of not talking about difficulties, and that may affect performance and certainly reception of the methods. And I mean, the final issue that we face is the difference in the culture of exam taking, with some of our students not used to and indeed quite shocked by the formality of exams in the UK and particularly at York. So there's a culture shock to address as well. So thank you very much for the points that you've made. We're going to relate to those in the discussion moving forward, and particularly when we come to our findings. So I'll pick those up later on. But clearly there are some shared concerns there. So let's move on, and briefly I just want to say a few words about the technology that we were using. Our exam environment was based on our institutional self-hosted VLE, or Learning Management System, Blackboard Learn. So we used Blackboard Learn version 9.1. And what we did was to set up a separate instance of our institutional platform, and we did that through private arrangement with Blackboard at no additional license fee cost, I should say. So this mirrored the main platform. It was running on the same version, but it was locked down and stripped down simply for use as an examination platform. So it had no other traffic apart from exam traffic, running on dedicated servers, and we ensured that there was a network freeze every time we ran exams, so we wouldn't encounter any performance problems. In terms of security, we controlled this through IP restrictions, so only students on campus could access the environment, and the access to the test site was through switching on a module availability switch, so we could switch that off as soon as we wanted to. I mentioned my interest in the Bradford, the thin client side of things. That influenced us as well in terms of going for a lockdown through a desktop environment using a virtual client. So what this enabled us to do was to use multiple PC classrooms across campus simultaneously to run the exam. So it's scalable and secure for our purposes. The purpose of today is not to talk about the technology, but we'll pop a link into the chat box showing, taking you to another presentation which we have done on focusing more on the details of the technology. Okay, let's move on then, and our teaching and assessment context. What our testing was focused on was a two-hour research methods examination, which was part of these core modules that the language students need to take. 75% of the exam consisted of multiple choice questions, which were automatically marked. But I think the novelty in what we were doing was also to introduce for the 2013-14 cohort a quarter of the question set of open response questions. And the purpose there was to use those open response questions to distinguish between knowledge and higher order thinking. And these questions were crafted to provide short scenarios in which students could evaluate a research instrument or imagine they were carrying out research, on a particular topic and explain their research strategy. And those questions were manually marked. Okay, I'll just finish off this section showing you a few screenshots of the questions that we used. And for anyone who's used a learning management system, I don't think there'll be any particular surprises here. This is standard fare, but this is the type of question types that are supported through Blackboard. The key thing is that whilst using variety, the full range of the questions available to us, we also took advantage of the randomization of the order of questions, and that helped us with the in terms of students at different workstations in a PC classroom getting different selections, so not being able to copy each other. We also used partial credit. So multiple answers were used. I'll just flick through these jumbled sentences. And multiple blanks, where you anticipate what the answer will be, and decide variations of that answer that are acceptable. And then on to the essay and the short answer and the scenario-based questions as well. One of the things, as I mentioned earlier on, that interested us was, particularly in going digital, was the ability to use automated item analyses for difficulty and discrimination analysis. And that was definitely something that we used to help improve the accuracy and level of the exam that we were running. And this is some screenshots of some tests that we've run using the in-house Blackboard tools, which I must say are pretty good for this purpose. And what we do for staff is to provide them with guidance on actually how to run analysis of their computer-based testing. We'll pop a link into the chat box there with a blog post and a video which actually explain how things were done, how they can be done. So that's the mathematics of it all, which you'll be relieved to hear I'm not going to go into, but there is a more explanation if you're interested. Okay, at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Zoe, who's going to talk through the research and our findings.
Okay, so hello everyone. As Richard had mentioned, our approach has been very much iterative. We've gone through a number of different stages of design and technical implementations. What we're going to talk about today, though, is the evaluations that we've conducted with students. So we've actually conducted 2 evaluations, so once in 2013-14 and then again in 2014-15. The questions that guided this evaluation you can see on screen. So you can see there essentially what we wanted to know was not just how students perceived the examination, but also we wanted to know how better to prepare them for examinations in future. The evaluations that we conducted were very much influenced initially by John Dermo's work at the University of Bradford. So initially, the variables that we explored in our initial survey were affect, so general sort of attitudes and how students felt about the examination, their perceptions of the validity of the approach, the practicality, the reliability, the security, and also the pedagogy. But also we were very much keen to really find out the students' own actual lived experiences and their own attitudes towards the examination, and perhaps things that we couldn't have anticipated. So in addition to the survey, we also ran focus groups. And in the first round, so the first phase, these highlight 2 previously unexplored issues, namely exam techniques, so strategies for answering questions online and sort of organizing which questions you might answer first, so prioritizing questions, and also production or keyboarding. So note that the key difference between our exam and many of the other pieces of research we've looked at is that we have some longer answer open response questions, so questions where students need to write say 5 sentences, about a paragraph in response to a stimulus. Further to this, equity was also an issue that was highlighted. And so these were variables that we looked up in our follow-up study. Other novel aspects of our study are the fact that it's longitudinal in nature. So we haven't just done a one-shot evaluation. We evaluated the first implementation, then we've looked at the impact of the changes that we've made as well. And the data we'll present today is from that second iteration. The other thing we did as well was explore a number of potential predictors of learners' engagement. So things like their previous experience of computer-based formative and summative assessment, their use of related technologies, their self-efficacy, and their keyboarding skills. So looking at that, as we've said, our students were mainly Chinese female students. They were studying for an MA in language education. And in terms of the predictors of engagement, what we found that was while half of them had reported experience of computer-based exams, for most of them this experience was limited. They also mostly use the internet every day, but thinking about the novel aspect of our study, so the use of these sort of longer open response questions, what we found was that students were very much split with respect to their proficiency in keyboarding, with half of them reporting pecking at the keyboard, so using one or two fingers, and a third of them reporting touch typing. So moving on to the actual data and what we found out about their experiences, what we found was that the majority of students didn't really see any problems with equity issues. What they particularly appreciated about the examination was the possibility of revising their answers, so not scrubbing things out with a pen, the security and reliability of examination. So just to let you know, the items, the means here, these are on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 was strongly disagree and 5 was strongly agree. So you can see these are the items they most agreed with and the features they most appreciated. Thinking about what they were more negative about, these really related to exam technique and questions of health and safety. And I'll go into these in more detail in a moment. One to note, though, is that I'm not going to talk anymore about the predictors that we looked at, because essentially we found no relationship there. So we found no relationship with computer self-efficacy and also no relationship with keyboarding skills. So thinking about what the actual issues were in greater depth, as some of you have highlighted in the chat discussion, socialization was very much a key issue for us. And this was because even though some students did have experience of computer-based testing, this was very limited and in very different contexts. So the students that had experience, these had experience in sort of the IELTS, the English language teaching examination. So really, in terms of socialization, what I'm talking about is generally gaining the students' acceptance of the examination. So them understanding the rationale for what we're doing and generally just being comfortable with doing an exam in front of the computer. So in terms of that, what we saw was that students did see some benefits. So you can see that they saw benefits in typing the answers questions rather than handwriting because they wouldn't be disadvantaged by the handwriting. But equally, perhaps counter to what we now know about the discourse around digital natives, students were seeing problems of this potentially not being fair to, for example, those students who've gone out and worked as a teacher and then come back to education. Other things that were interesting that we noted were that while students saw the use of computer-based exams as beneficial, what they did note was that we still needed to justify the use of a computer-based exam in our context because we weren't exploiting the full affordance of the computer for research methods. So we found our students were expecting that we'd have questions in which they'd use SPSS, so statistical analysis software. And the other thing we saw was we didn't need to socialize the students in terms of using computer-based exams, but as some of you had highlighted in the chat box, also general exam etiquette or policy that's specific to our country or our institution and context. And this was actually quite surprising how different it was here in the UK to in China. More specifically and more critically, though, what we found was that general socialization of learners and also generally equipping them with general ICT literacy was not sufficient for students to be comfortable and to accept the examination situation. And so what our research very much suggests is that you need to equip students with dedicated skills for taking online examinations. And in particular, students really need to have the opportunities to practice under real examination conditions in order to get used to typing under examination conditions, using the institutional hardware that's available. So found that the students had difficulties because their keyboards differed from our own, and also getting used to the exam environment. So as I said, we actually used a locked down environment, and this meant that some of the correction tools that they expected to usually be available weren't actually available in our system. On that note, so that issue of students not being familiar with the hardware, I'd just like to highlight that there is research elsewhere, so at the University of Queensland, where our chair today works, where they are using bring your own device approach, so I understand this is a lockdown approach, so that might overcome the issues we encountered. The other issue that we encountered in terms of preparation was about online examination technique. So what we found was that really students really very much appreciated the formative experience that we gave them. So they actually sat down and did a formative midterm exam under approximately the same conditions as the final examination. So it was in silent conditions, it was time, they had an hour compared to 2 hours for the final examination, and it was very much fully with the same software. And what we found from this was that from that students appreciated the ability to develop their exam technique, because they couldn't directly translate their exam techniques they'd used for paper-based exams, things like circling questions, underlining keywords, to the main examination. So very much that it was about sort of organization of the examination as well, so prioritizing which questions they answered first. And so this was why they were looking to perhaps arrows on questions and things like that. Another concern that came up was revision strategies. And here this was actually quite surprising, because students are our Chinese students are actually quite familiar with multiple choice testing. This is very much what they do in their context. But what the challenge for them was actually moving to the questions that required them to have greater criticality. So as I said, in order to make sure that the exam was pitched at the right level and did test criticality, in addition to multiple choice questions, which can be quite difficult to pick, what we had was some open response questions, which required students to write around about 5 sentences in response to a research method or a research scenario. That's not to say that the students didn't actually see some positives here. Actually, they thought it was positive that they didn't need to rote memorize. It was just that they'd got to develop new strategies in order to be able to revise for our examination. There were also some issues about the assessment interface. And here what we very much saw was that students tended to be split. We had some students who would say that they wanted all the longer answer questions at the beginning of the examination, so as we can see in the student on the right, because they needed time to build up their confidence and to get into the swing of the examination. Whereas others, others would want so some wanted them right at the beginning of the exam so that they could better manage their time, whereas others, like those two that we've got on screen, wanted the questions, the longer answer questions later in the examination, because they hadn't yet got into the swing of the examination and also built up their confidence. So one thing actually that we noticed with the exam that they talked about in relation to typing was, because they could hear other people typing, they had this idea about how quickly others were getting through the exam, and sometimes rightly or wrongly had this idea that others were progressing much more quickly through the examination. This, though, very much brings us back to the point about learning sort of dedicated strategies or developing exam technique for online examinations, because what we can see here is that it's just never going to be possible for us to match or to accommodate all students' preferences. Therefore, what we need is an interface that is very flexible, that can accommodate different strategies or preferences, but also we're going to need to provide students with opportunities, so formative opportunities, to develop their strategies so that they can actually use the flexibility to make it fit their preferences. So overall, what did we find? Well, we found that overall, students still did feel that the preparations that we'd provided them for the examination meant that they were well prepared for the exam. I'm not sure that we've really gone into this so far, so I'll just reiterate what we did. So first of all, we actually produced an online screencast of the software to sort of take students step by step through what would happen in an examination, how they'd log in, and also allow them to see the different question types. Further to that, we also, within the VLE, we had a dedicated part of the VLE where they could do a few practice questions in their own time. And then we followed this up with a full-on formative examination, which was timed and under examination condition with the normal sort of invigilation happening, and also provided with any paper-based materials that would be available in the exam. So we do provide a cover sheet for the examination with the instructions and a little bit of blank paper in there so that they can use that to accommodate their different exam taking strategies. Despite this, though, they were less sort of keen on whether we should replace the exam with an online exam. They were very much there, I think, split. And what the students said to us was that really, for them to feel more comfortable with the examination, they would need more formative opportunities to really get used to the exam system, to develop their exam strategies. This, of course, though, is quite a challenge because, as we said, we're working with master's students who've not been with us for a very long time, and therefore they can't we haven't got that much time to give them these formative opportunities. So to sum up, very much what we found was that general socialization, as found in other research, is still important. You still need to explain to students the rationale for doing the exam and to really highlight the benefits to them of doing the exam in this way. So us being able, for example, being able to turn around the feedback to them in good time. But what we did find, sort of our novel findings, were that this isn't sufficient. What we really need to do is to equip students with dedicated IT proficiency for computer-based testing. So we need to make sure that they're able to complete questions under time conditions, but also to make sure that they have opportunities to develop the test-taking strategies that they need to really perform well on the online examination. So outside of the context of computer-based testing, further to the references we've got here, you'll see that there is significant research which suggests there is a strong relationship between test-taking strategies and performance on examinations. And as we said, also what we need is really flexible interfaces in order to accommodate the different preferences and different test-taking strategies. However, here, as we say, we accept that one interface doesn't fit all, and therefore it is really, really important to have those opportunities for socialization and practice which allow the students to develop the dedicated strategies. In terms of what we've actually done as a result of this, this has led us to develop our own framework of, well, a proposal of factors that others who are planning to adopt computer-based testing ought to take into account before implementing. So we really suggest that people look at this issue of socialization very carefully, think very carefully about how they're going to prepare students for the examination and prepare them with formative opportunities to develop their exam technique and other aspects, and also that they need to think about the assessment design. In terms of what we've actually done ourselves, as I said, we give the students a briefing. So further to what I've actually mentioned, we give them now a briefing on general exam regulations. So what we found was that the general exam regulations in China were very much different to here. So even when doing a paper-based exam, and given the added potential complexities of running a computer-based exam, we feel that it's really important that's very clear at the start. Further to the additional things of making sure that they're familiar with the exam environment, giving them some practice in their own time with the exam, and then the formative experience under exam conditions that will really give them that opportunity to develop their confidence and also their exam taking strategy. Finally, we've also looked at the assessment interface design. We've looked at how we block the questions, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So further to those points, what we also do now, so at the beginning of the examination, we have our VLE team actually talk them through how to log in. And because of this issue of exam strategy coming up very often, we do highlight to them now at the very beginning of the exam, remind them of the navigation pane that they can use to skip and jump around the questions and basically adapt the exam to their own preferences. Further to that, what we've done in terms of the problems that the students noted about keyboarding, so not just their proficiency in keyboarding, but also the noise in the room and the effect of that on their comfort and their anxiety levels. We've actually now adjusted the proportion of short answer to longer answer questions, such that now we have less longer answer questions. So these questions where the students are asked to write about 5 sentences, so a paragraph, which are designed to tap higher order criticality. We now, rather than having 4 questions, we have just 2, and we're still managing to tap the higher order criticality. The other thing we've done in response to student suggestions about the design and the organization of the questions is initially, because we're a greenfield site and we do not have exam rooms with privacy screens, what we did initially was to randomize the questions across the whole exam. But as you can see, because we mix up short answer and long answer questions, this was causing problems perhaps in terms of equity, with some getting the long answer questions at the beginning, others later on, and them having difficulty to manage their time. So what we now do is we explicitly tell them that we've blocked questions by the number of marks available, and they see the longer answer questions randomized among each other, then the next sort of long answer ones, and then finally the shortest answer questions blocked together. So what that means is that there's greater equity, but because they are more aware of the navigation pane, they're able to adapt that to their exam strategies. Okay, well, that's enough for me, and that really does sort of capture what we've learned from this. What we'd like to do to finish off is to see what you think of our framework, how transferable you think it might be to perhaps postgraduates you work with, or even undergraduates, and also to think about whether our experience is only relevant to greenfield institutions, and finally to think about whether this is just an issue at the moment, and it's something that as we move on and as students are more and more familiar with computer-based assessment, perhaps from their experiences in school or on their undergraduate programs, that this is going to be less of an issue for ourselves. So what I'd like to suggest perhaps there is that if you've got any sort of questions in relation to perhaps more the pedagogical aspects, you might want to ask those questions over the microphone. And if you've got questions on the technical aspects, Richard's currently on the chat, so it's not me who's typing and speaking at the same time. If you'd like to post the technical questions to Richard on the chat and any pedagogy questions to me over the microphone, hopefully we can try to manage the discussion like that.
So just butt in there. If anybody wants to ask a pedagogically focused question, you may raise your hand using the little hand symbol at the top of the participants list.
Okay. Well, just in the meantime, whilst we're waiting, if you've got any questions, I'm really happy to answer those. I'll just make a few comments on our UG experience. So I don't actually personally have any other experience with other postgraduate cohorts. I have, however, been involved with the undergraduate cohort. So we have some second-year undergraduate students who also do a research methods module. And with them, what we've been doing is we're only using multiple choice questions. Here we found much less resistance to the approach, and we've also found that they're much more comfortable with the examination. Now, there may be a number of reasons for this. So first of all, it might be because we're only asking them to do multiple choice questions. And this is to do with how we actually set up the whole module. And it's because on that module, we actually have a paper-based assignment as well. So they write an essay, and we can test the criticality through that. Another couple of reasons why the students may not have or may have been more comfortable is we know from talking to invigilators come in to invigilate our exams here is that actually this type of multiple choice style examination is becoming much more frequent in UK schools. The other thing is that these are our second year students. Throughout the university, they will have had other, even if it's not directly related to their modules, they will have had other experiences of using online tutorials where they'll have done sort of formative type assessments with multiple choice questions. So getting students comfortable with the exam, so socializing them has been much less of a problem. And actually exam making strategy, I would suggest, is also less of a problem because we don't mix so much questions which have higher marks with questions which have lower marks. The questions generally about the sort of worth the same. What the real issue there for us is how to deal with students with individual arrangements. So students who are allowed extra time, perhaps because they have dyslexia, or students who, for other reasons, are allowed to sit examinations in other exam rooms. So this has very much posed a challenge to us, both sort of in terms of feasibility and having enough staff to support that, but also in terms of making sure we've got enough people who've got the right skills to do that. Anyway, I'm going to finish it off there. Thank you very much for all of your comments. There were some really interesting comments earlier in the chat. I don't know if Richard wants to say anything to finish up on anything that he's seen in the chat whilst I've been talking. No? Okay. So really, very much thank you for participating today, and thank you for your feedback in the chat. Just to finish off, I'd like to let you know that we are working on a research paper based on this, and you can have a look at the draft of that online. Also, if you want something a little bit shorter and digestible, we've also got a video case study, so a blog and a short video that you could take a look at. So thank you all again.
Oops, I need to press the talk button. Yep, thanks Zoe and Richard, that was great. If people could fill in the post-session survey, there's the references too, by the way, in the presentation. I'm just going to click through the slides and some more references, which will be all captured in the recording. And then we go, thank you. So we have a link to the post-session survey. If you could please go and fill that in, that helps us keep our evaluation and justify our existence. As I sort of mentioned before, all the recordings will be on our website. I will put up links to all the links that have been flowing through the text chat there, because there's some good resources. Otherwise, thank you very much, and we will all see you again in about a month's time. If you'd like to stick around and ask questions, you're welcome to do so, but I'm going to shut off the recording now. So just a final thank you to Richard and Zoe.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, we really do. If you have got any questions and you want to stay around, we will be here for the next half an hour or so.